The last piece of the canonical web application architecture that we need to discuss in this course is the presentation tier. That is, the technologies that are used to construct the views that are provided to the end users. Here's where the technologies associated with the presentation tier reside. It's important to note that they span the web tier. The presentation tier doesn't include any technologies in the web tier. It includes technologies on either side of it. That is, the presentation tier has parts in the presentation logic tier and other parts in the client tier. Let's dig in. The presentation tier, which again consists of the presentation logic and client tiers, produces what users see and interact with in their browser. It's more than just a bunch of hyperlinks. The stickiness and the usability of a website can make or break a business. A high-quality website has useful functionality that it provides to the end users, a visually appealing layout, and an intuitive navigation structure. Tim Berners-Lee was originally only interested in making scientific documents easily accessible via the web. However, the web now has a massive business footprint that requires marketing. Thus, the ability to create a cutting-edge website now often means the difference between business success and failure. What is appealing depends upon the audience, and it's beyond the scope of this course to consider the artistic aspects of website design. It's important to recognize that designing layouts and web pages from scratch requires some graphic design skills. The complexity of what is happening on the client side in web applications has increased significantly over the years. For instance, we now have cookies that are involved with session management. We have client-side validations that work to correct data entry errors that are happening on the user side. Client-side JavaScript that improves the interactivity of web sites. And then there's a very new proliferation of frameworks that allow you to easily create modern layouts and responsive design. For instance, Twitter Bootstrap and Zurb Foundation are front-end frameworks that are commonly used to create beautiful websites. We won't talk about these in this module. They'll be covered in a later course in this specialization. What we need to do now is learn the fundamentals. So, even if you aren't involved in website design, it's important to have knowledge of what's happening on the front end. You need to understand the basic design patterns and principles that underlie client-side technologies. It's often worthwhile to hire a graphic designer, but even if you do, there are some fundamental principles that you need to know that indeed every developer should understand. We'll talk about these in a later video. You want the presentation tier of your web application to be resilient, easy to modify and maintain, just like the other parts of your web application. Furthermore, you might be the one that has to implement a graphic designer's ideas, or you might need to use your knowledge of the fundamental design principles to make sure a graphic designer doesn't create an unmanageable mess. In a later video in this lesson, we'll talk more about these basic design principles, and we'll also talk about HTML. This is the language that's used for specifying specifically the structure of a web page. We'll also talk about cascading style sheets, or CSS for short. This is the language that's used for styling the elements that are in a web page. And we'll also talk about JavaScript. This is the language used for adding behaviors to the elements that are in a web page.